Hello, I'm attorney Mark Rosenfeld, and I want to talk a few minutes about this yellow form that I've got here from the Los Angeles Superior Court. It's called an Advisement of Rights, Waiver, and Plea form. It's also sometimes referred to as a TALL form. And this is a form that is required in Los Angeles to be filled out by anybody who was charged with a DUI if they are working out a deal. And a deal would be a plea bargain, so you're agreeing to certain terms. And this 4-page form for first-time DUI talks about what rights you have, what rights you give up, and what you don't give up by taking a deal. It also talks about the maximum and minimum penalties for a DUI, for a second-time DUI, and it talks about some of the issues that may come up unrelated to the court case, like Department of Motor Vehicles actions against your license. The form has 4 pages and 37 different line items, so it's quite comprehensive. And it's important that if you're going to take a deal to a DUI in Los Angeles County, you go through this form in detail on your own, and also to discuss it in detail with your attorney. If we start at the beginning, at the top of the form, it has a spot for the case number and case name, as well as what department you're in. So on this Advisement of Rights, Waiver, and Plea form, there are about 37 different issues that you should go over, and most of them are going to be required to have your initials acknowledging that those situations exist or could exist in your particular case. The first line item talks about the right to an attorney, the right to be represented by an attorney, and how important that is. The second line item says that you give up your right to an attorney. Now, typically, we would cross that out because we are not giving up the right to an attorney. You want to have an attorney represent you, so you would cross out the ones that don't apply. You would typically be charged on a first-time DUI with driving under the influence and driving above the legal limit. The form covers other sections as well, like being a commercial driver. That typically does not apply. And it also includes a reckless driving related to alcohol, and that typically does not apply. There may be other offenses that are charged with a DUI. Those could be infractions like speeding or unsafe lane change, but more often they would be driving without a license or some other penal or vehicle code that may have been violated. It talks about the right to a jury trial, the right to confront and cross-examine witnesses, the right to remain silent, and the right to produce evidence. These are different constitutional rights that you have with your attorney to present evidence and defend a case. You may want to call an expert witness to come to court and testify. You may want to take the stand and testify yourself. And if you take a deal, you're giving up your right to confront and cross-examine witnesses. You're also giving up your right to remain silent, because by pleading no contest or pleading guilty, you are basically testifying against yourself and admitting responsibility. The form goes on to talk about what the minimum and maximum penalties are for a first and second time offense. It talks about the probation period. It talks about what the fines would be, as well as any classes that may be required, and enhancements if the alcohol level is high or if there's a refusal allegation. It talks about if there's a second-time DUI, what the consequences would be, the mandatory jail time, and the maximum exposure. On a first-time offense, it's up to 6 months in jail. On a second time, it's up to a year. It talks about what the penalties would be if there was a reckless driving charge. And then there's a place to initial that you have read and understand what the minimum and maximum penalties are on the first offense and the second offense. The form goes on to talk about what's called a penalty assessment. The best way to view this is as a tax that is added on to a criminal case. So if the base fine or minimum fine on a DUI in Los Angeles is $390, they add to that a penalty assessment, which basically takes that amount and multiplies it by 5. So on a first-time DUI, the minimum penalty in Los Angeles is about $2,000 right now, and every year it goes up. The form goes on to talk about what would happen if somebody's under 21 or has a 0.15 or above blood alcohol level, with increased penalties for people in that situation. And the form goes on to talk about what is commonly referred to as a Watson advisement, which talks about if somebody gets in an accident as a result of drinking and driving, and if somebody is killed, how they can be charged with murder, and their exposure would be 15 years to life if someone was killed as a result of drunk driving. The form goes on to talk about what may happen to a car, that it may be impounded, which could be part of a deal or could be a mandatory requirement if there are extenuating circumstances. The form talks about what the Department of Motor Vehicles will do or can do if you have a regular license, a commercial license, if you have multiple offenses, and each of the DMV issues has an initial box where you would initial that you understand what the consequences would be of a conviction in court and what the consequences would be of an administrative action being separate from the court. The form talks about what would happen if you're not a citizen, or what could happen if you're not a citizen to the United States. It talks about the possibility of deportation, exclusion from admission, or denial of naturalization. And you have to initial acknowledging that you understand what those things mean. The form goes on to talk about probation, and if you're on probation, what could happen if you plead no contest or guilty in this case, and what the terms of your probation will be, one of those not driving with any alcohol in your system. There's a place on the form to add what the penalties could be on any additional charges, with minimum and maximum penalties. And on the back of the form, it has a location to enter a plea of guilty or no contest. We want to enter a no contest plea to keep the deal as clean as possible, and what the charge is that you're pleading no contest to, whether that's a DUI, a reckless driving, exhibition of speed. And it also talks about you having a right to be sentenced, delaying the sentence. So if you want to come back a different day to court, say you want to come back a week later, you have a right to do that, or you have a right to delay from 6 hours up to 5 days. Normally, if we're taking a deal, we're going to waive that right because we know what the deal is going to be and we want to get it done that day. And if there is a temporary judge, then there's a place to fill in the temporary judge's information. Once you review all that, you initial all the boxes, there's a place to sign that you understood everything. The attorney will then also sign off on it. This form would then get submitted to the judge. The judge would review the form, usually in open court with the attorney and the client, and then if the judge believes that everything is done correctly, the judge would sign off on the form. And that would complete the plea process paperwork, and there would be some additional discussions on the record in open court in front of the judge to finalize the deal. So that's a little bit about the DUI Advisement of Rights waiver and plea form. You should look it over in detail, and any questions that you might have, you want to talk to your attorney about. DUI Defense Attorney Mark Rosenfeld. You can reach me at 310-424-3145.